The fifth installment of the Suikoden series has something of a checkered past. It began as another Gaiden or side chapter of the main series and began development prior to Suikoden 4. However, over the course of this game's creation, the development team grew, including Takehiro Sakiyama, a newcomer to the series who served as the game's director, and Kazuyoshi Sugawa, who worked on the battle design in a little-known game called Skies of Arcadia and served as the main writer for this new title. Eventually, this Gaiden game became the next full-fledged main entry of the Suikoden series, Suikoden 5. Released on the PlayStation 2 in North America near the end of its life on March 21st, 2006, Suikoden 5 would be the last main installment in the series. So, does the game end the Suikoden legacy with a bang, or does it follow in the footsteps of Suikoden 4 and end up as a disappointment? Set 6 years prior to the events of the first Suikoden and 142 years after Suikoden 4, Suikoden 5 takes place in the Queendom of Felina, a monarchy in which the queen rules, and females of the royal family inherit the throne. The game's story follows the Prince of Felina, who is named by the player and is once again a silent protagonist. The narrative centers around the political strife of the Queendom, in which, as the prince, players must gather allies, 108 stars of destiny, and handle many of the current and future issues Felina does and will face. If you couldn't tell, I'm being intentionally vague about the story, as I believe for the best experience possible, new players are best off knowing next to nothing going in. But know this, Suikoden 5 has a fantastic, compelling story that takes the series back to its politically driven based roots, with some mystic elements like the runes playing an important role once again. The game's narrative is easily on par with Suikoden 2, and easily the best presented story in the entire series, but more on that a little later. But that isn't to say that the story is perfect. The first 5 hours or so are excruciatingly slow-paced. Conversations and cutscenes can also drag on since you can't skip through dialogue, and the text speed, even at the fastest setting, is infuriatingly slow. Unfortunately, these snail-paced opening hours of the game are kinda necessary for setting up Suikoden 5's grand tale, which is worth pushing through those first few hours for. Like several other entries in the series, Suikoden 5's cast of characters are an interesting bunch, and recruiting them all is as addictive as ever. One thing the game does better than previous games is that each Star of Destiny is incredibly well developed considering how many of them there are, or at least much more so than we've seen in any other game in the series. This is largely in part to the game featuring many of them in the overall narrative, which makes recruiting each character feel all the more important. Also, fans of the first two games can be sure to see some familiar faces. So I know I may be a bit too vague in my description so far, but for the sake of spoilers, let me just summarize. Suikoden 5 has an amazing story, a huge, well-developed cast of characters, and again, I can't stress how much of an improvement this game's narrative and characters are over the previous two games in the series. Suikoden 5 also takes the series back to its roots from a gameplay standpoint. 6-man parties are back, co-op attacks function just like they did in Suikodens 1 and 2, as well as army battles return to the rock-paper-scissors format seen in the first game, but heavily expanded upon. The game features a new formation system that allows you to switch the formation of your party in on the fly, with different buffs or debuffs being applied depending on the formation you select. You'll explore towns and dungeons from a top-down perspective, which can be a bit annoying since you can have your vision obscured quite easily, and your only means of controlling the camera is zooming it in further. Like I said before, battles are very similar to how they function to the first Suikoden games, which in my opinion is a good thing. Character progression is very similar to how it's always been, but the skill system from Suikoden 3 returns. Now characters are only able to equip a few skills at a time, including counterattacking, attack or defense buffs, or skills that allow you to train other characters' skills. Overall, the skill system in place here encourages specialization, which I found much more interesting than Suikoden 3's skill system that heavily favored specific skills that every character should learn. The days of horrible sailing are far behind the series now, as the Overworld makes a triumphant return. I honestly nearly teared up the moment I discovered this game had a fully 3D Overworld for me to explore. But the throwbacks don't end there. As I mentioned earlier, army battles are essentially an improved version of the system seen in Suikoden 1. In the various army battles, you'll be commanding many units, each with a particular strength and weakness, much like rock, paper, scissors, as I have said a few times now. Depending on the circumstance, you may even be commanding a fleet of ships, in which gameplay terms is exactly the same as land army battles. Dueling, which has been every game in the series, has reached its peak as the various duels featured here are the most exciting they have ever seen in the series. This is largely due to how much more visually engaging these duels are. From a mechanical point of view, they function more or less the same as they always have. As a whole, Suikoden 5 is easily one of the most engaging titles to play in the series. After Suikoden 4's various missteps in trying to standardize the formula, Suikoden 5 presents an impeccable return to form that is sure to appeal to fans of the series. The only real issue I have with the overall gameplay is that the game is kinda easy, especially if you have the right combination of skills, party members, and formations. Most encounters can be a total cakewalk. It seems so far in this retrospective I've criticized each PlayStation 2 Suikoden title for its, at the time, poor visuals. Suikoden 5 will not receive the same criticism. I am thrilled to report that Suikoden 5 is easily the best looking 3D title in the series. The game's graphics are colorful, well animated for the time, and more importantly, don't hurt your eyes to look at. Cutscenes specifically have benefited considerably from the improved visuals. Many important cutscenes use full animation, voice acting, and higher quality character models which look fantastic. The only real downside to all of this is that the game has some loading issues. Most loading screens can take around 2 to 5 seconds, which wouldn't be too bad, but unfortunately the game has to load constantly, and loading into battles can take upwards to 10 seconds. So, despite having the disappointing drawback of frequent loading screens, Suikoden 5 is without a doubt the most visually impressive title in the series, as well as being one of the better looking RPGs on the PlayStation 2 in general. Keeping up with the series' high standards of music, Suikoden 5 has an excellent soundtrack. While it may not have any of my favorite songs from the series, the music is of very high quality and is once again used very appropriately throughout the game. Suikoden 5 also features plenty of voice acting, which is arguably the best voice work the series has ever seen. Suikoden 5 is everything a fan of the series should want out of a new title. It has a great compelling story, a huge and incredibly well developed cast, with the most refined gameplay seen in the series, and possibly of any RPG on the PlayStation 2. While the trade-off for sharp graphics results in some annoyance with the loading screens, the end product is still excellent. I know I've gushed about how as a fan of the series I've had nothing but good things to say about this game, but Suikoden 5 is set up as a perfectly good place to start for newcomers as well, as it does not require any prior knowledge of the series to play. But if you are familiar with many of the past games, expect to see tons of fan service, such as the prince wearing the same clothes as the hero Suikoden 1, or the inclusion of George Prime as a main character who was a fan favorite from Suikoden 2, in which we can finally find out his whole backstory. So, should you buy Suikoden 5? For most of you watching, I'd say, no, you should not. Whoa, hold on, before anyone comments or freaks out, allow me to elaborate. There is no doubt in my mind that Suikoden 5 is an absolutely fantastic RPG worthy of your time, but suffers the same fate as its predecessors. It commands some unholy prices. Aside for some of the most hardcore fans such as myself, I simply cannot on a good conscience recommend anyone pay what online retailers and resellers demand for this game. I have rarely ever seen Suikoden 5 sell for anything less than $80 for a complete in-box copy. Maybe this is just me, but I have a fairly strict policy on never paying more than $40 for a PlayStation 2 game. The only reason I even own Suikoden 5 is due to me getting a bundle deal for all the PlayStation 2 titles. Whether or not Suikoden 5 will one day appear on the PlayStation Network remains to be seen, as with how Konami operates these days, no one can know for certain. But then again, Suikoden 3 just saw its own digital re-release, so hopefully the same thing happens for Suikoden 5, and if it does, I'd highly recommend waiting and instantly buying that when it happens. But to wrap things up, Suikoden 5 is easily one of the best games in the series and a standout RPG in the PlayStation 2. While I don't think it's quite as good as Suikoden 2 due to its poor pacing at the beginning, annoying and frequent loading screens, as well as it being a bit too easy for my taste. But, as I'm sure many of you are tired of me saying, Suikoden 5 is a damn good game that is well worth the time of any RPG fan, even for those unfamiliar with the Suikoden series. Sadly, despite being such an excellent title, Suikoden 5 came too late in the PlayStation 2's life cycle, and sold much worse than the other games in the series. As a result, Suikoden 5 is the last main entry in the Suikoden series, but that doesn't mean this retrospective is done quite yet. Those of us in the English-speaking world would see the release of one last Suikoden game, but that will have to wait till next time. As such, I hope to see you all in the conclusion of the Suikoden retrospective with my review of Suikoden Terracris for the Nintendo DS. How do you say that game anyway? If anyone knows the correct pronunciation, be sure to say so in the comments, otherwise you're going to be hearing me mispronounce it throughout the entire next video. As always, I've been Darren the Gaming Pilgrimage. Till next time. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching the video. I forgot to mention during the review, but Suikoden 5 is quite a lengthy title. It actually took me around 50 hours to see the end of the game, and that's not even getting everything, so there's a lot to do here. But it's almost the end of this retrospective, there's only one video left to go, so I decided to have a poll up, which you can see in the description, in which you can vote for what game series you can see being covered in the next retrospective, so be sure to vote for your favorite. And remember, just because a title isn't voted doesn't mean it will never have a retrospective. There's always a possibility of that happening later on. So as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.